Shalom Aleichem. Vayeitzei Beis. It's a magnificent sikha. Originally said on Shabbos Parshas Vayeitzei, which was Tes Kislev Tavshin Lamed Beis, 1971. And the unedited version, the original sikha, is an incredible exploration. It goes much more beyond what the Mugadika sikha, the edited version of the sikha, goes. But let's focus on the sikha and try to bring some insights and some things that maybe come across more in the unedited version to just bring a richness to the sikha. The original Favrengen, the Rebbe spoke about Dina and her name and how her name came about, but that doesn't play out in the sikha. Over here, the sikha talks about Reuven. Leah falls pregnant and she gives birth and she calls her son Reuven because she says, Ra'a Hashem ba'ani, Hashem saw my poverty, my emotional poverty, and now my husband will love me. Comes Rashi and says, Vatikla Shmei Reuven, and she called him Reuven and explains. Rabbi Seinu Pirshu, Rabbi Seinu explained that she said, Re'uma ben Gdila ben Chami, look at the difference between my son and my father-in-law's son. Shemach Rabbi Yaakov, my father-in-law's firstborn son, Esav, sold his bechayla. V'zel loy mechal Yosef. And my son Reuven does not sell his firstborn son rights to Yosef. V'loy idar and does not cause and is not angry at him when Yosef does get the firstborn rights. V'loy oid, and even more so, shlo yidar el shabikish leitziyah me'abar. Even more so, not only does he not fight it, but he is willing to take him out of the bar. When Yosef is thrown out in Pashas, thrown into the bar in Pashas Vayeshev through the brothers. Ask the Shaila. Rashi comes and says a statement, which Rebbe is the foundation of all the Rebbe Sichos and Rashi. I'm only here to say pshat. How in the world? Like, why do we have to get here? What's wrong in the pshat? What's wrong? My husband will love me. Mazel tov. Now, more than that, Rashi goes in something and says it's hepech. He goes punkt fakert, the opposite of what the pasuk says. The pasuk says, Hashem saw my poverty, now my husband will love me. Comes Rashi and says, not that my husband will love me, but rather she says, she's saying a statement. Look at the difference between me and my son. Nothing to do with my husband love me, nothing. Just look at the difference. Why should I look at the difference? Now, even though the pshat of Rashi originally is from the Gemara and Brachos, we know that Rashi says, I only come to say pshat. And whenever I bring Agada, it's only something that fits into the pshat and is necessary. So what's necessary? So there are some Mefarshim that brings from Chidushia, Agadas, Marsha, etc., that the reason the pasuk, when the pasuk says Kira Hashem ba'ani is not enough, is because that only explains the first half of the name, the U. But what does that have to do? Bain. And therefore focus b'ni lebein chami, the difference between my son and the other son. But the Rebbe says in Rashi, you don't have to get there. Why? First of all, if Rashi says that he has the reason why he has to bring another reason is because that's Re'u and this is Bain, he should mention it. Also, it's not such a shaila. We see other times. You could say that the word Bain is be'ani, connects with that. We see other times throughout the Torah, Shamayim is Shamayim, even though you don't necessarily find the double mem or the shah, the aleph. You get the point. So like the fact that there's lacking a few letters, it's not the end of the world. The Rebbe has a huge conversation over here about letters and the role they play in tons of footnotes, footnote 9 to footnote 15. But fundamentally, why does Rashi need to get there? Say that bang, whatever fits, ba'ani, etc. Also, you have to understand, Leah says the umabni. Why is she focusing on, Rashi's choosing to focus on something that will happen much more in the future, a vaita nevuah, a prophecy that's going to happen very much in the future, and something that's negative about Reuven, the fact that the Bechor was taken away from Reuven because of his sin, mixed up his father's bed. And the fact that Yosef was put in a pit, why don't you just say something that's much more positive and something that's going to happen much more very soon in the future? My brother-in-law, Esav ben Chami, stole, and my son by the Dudaim, as we say in the V, in Parshas Vayeitzei, he didn't go to take the things that belonged to somebody else, and like Pashat Yadir Begezel, but rather he went and took what was hefker. Also, in the Rashi itself, it's problematic because he goes different than the Gemara. The Gemara says that my son, my brother-in-law, the son of my father-in-law, even though he sold the Bechayda, nevertheless he hated Yaakov. But my son, even though Yosef took his Bechayra by kind of without his choice, nevertheless he won't be jealous with him. In other words, the difference between Esav and Reuven is the jealousy. Esav is jealous and Reuven's not jealous. But Rashi doesn't bring about the jealousy at all. He just talks about that Esav was nonchalant and gives away the Bechayra, and Reuven doesn't give away the Bechayra. But that's not what the Gemara talks about. The Gemara talks about that the Bechayra is taken away and he doesn't hold a grudge. Rashi adds, "V'loi ired alav," he didn't cause problems, and not only that, he took him out the Bechayra. Now, then you should contrast. If that's the mile of Reuven, that he takes his brother out of the bird, then contrast it with Esav, that he caused problems with the Bechayra, etc. But we don't mention anything in Rashi like that. And that he wanted to kill Yaakov. So what's the explanation of all this? Beautiful, beautiful, whole new insight. Says the Rebbe like this: the simple reason that she says that Hashem saw my poverty and now my husband will like me, yeah, it makes sense. It will cause her husband to like her. Usually that's the way it works. You have a child, it brings love. The problem is over here it doesn't work like that so easily. Why? Because he says, Ki ato, now my husband will love me. Why? Maybe not now. Why? Because this was a few months after they got married. We didn't even know yet. Yaakov doesn't know yet that Rachel is barren. So she's falling pregnant as a baby, and Rachel will have a baby. So how do you know this will cause the love? Second of all, how do you know the son is going to be a good kid that's going to go in the decent path and give nachas? Maybe he'll be a disappointment. Especially that we have, unfortunately, quite a legacy. Avram's first son goes off the path. Yitzchak's first son goes off the path. So why should we think Yaakov's jumping up and down from the first son? And that might cause even worse. That could cause a distance between the husband and wife if the kid doesn't follow their path. So therefore, Rashi says there has to be something unique about the fact that this is the Reuven, not only the fact that she has a baby now. Elamai, Rabbi Seinu Pirshu, Rabbi Seinu explain, in other words, they add on to explain the words Atu Yavani Ishi, because the son enough is not, to have a son is not enough. And it explains the Umma Ben Nila Ben Chami, and that explains why Yavani Ishi. And that's why Rashi brings the point that the Reuven does not sell it and no other Mila, because that's brings out the Mila of the Pasuk. Why? Because what are we talking about? We're talking about a Ben Bechar Yaakov, the fact that he's a firstborn. So we focus on the Mila that has to do with the firstborn itself. Unlike the previous firstborn, Esav, who sold his rights, Reuven doesn't. And Rashi says more than that. He doesn't even fight it when Yosef takes away, and he takes him out of the bar, which means that even though Yaakov loved Rachel and he wanted to have children, nevertheless, when he has such a great son from Leah, incredible, nevertheless, Yaakov takes the Bechorah away from him and gives it to Yosef. Nevertheless, Reuven doesn't complain, even though his father loves Yosef's son more. And he takes him out of the bar. And over there, the Rebbe says in the other, and it's much more brought out in the unedited, the original Sikha, where the Rebbe says, think about it. If he allowed Yosef to stay in the pit, the firstborn right might go back to him. Yosef dies, who's it going to go back to by default? So he has an opportunity here to get back his first rights, and just by doing nothing, Sheval Taisa, do nothing. He still goes and saves Yosef, knowing that now he's going to regain his firstborn rights, Yosef. That is the incredible level of Reuven. And the Rebbe says that that's what a chassid is. A chassid sorry from him, burns his nails, even though it's going to cause problems because he sees the incredible milah of helping another yid. Unbelievable insight on Reuven. And that's why the Rebbe says you don't have to focus on the fact, contrast it so much with Esav, because the point is not how bad Esav is. The incredible point is how amazing Reuven is. And that's why it says Pirshu, that we're saying Pirshu, not other that we're saying because it's an explanation. Rashi's not negating what the pasuk says, he's just adding on to it. He's giving a deeper meaning to why Atu Yavani Ishi. So that is the end of the part of the Sikha Al Pi Pshat. Now the Rebbe goes, the second half of the Sikha, really focusing on Yena Shal Torah, the Chassidus element, specifically focusing on names. We find the difference between the way the Shevotim were given names to the way the Avos were given names. The Shevotim were given their names by the Imahos. However, the Avos, Yitzchak and Yaakov, got it from, well, Avram got it from Hashem, and the rest was given by Avtzon, etc., or the people around, but it wasn't specifically the mother. And also we see a difference that by the Shevotim, there's always a reason why they get the name, and the Avos, there's no reason clearly in the Torah. Al Kain Kara, there's a reference there because there was laughter. So Yitzchak, Yaakov, that he touched the legs, so therefore Korish Yaakov. But it's not Al Kain. It's not a strong connection. The Torah doesn't explicitly say why he was given the name. So in order to explain the difference between the Avos and the Shevotim in regards to names, we have to explain the idea of a name. It says that ever we know that Chassidus explains, starting from the Magid, that a name is not just like, an agreeable word. We decide that this person's name is Chaim. But it has a shaykhus to the etzem adava, to the essence of the thing. Elamai, it doesn't necessarily associate to the neshama the way the neshama is by itself, because the neshama, before coming into a guf, doesn't have a name at all. Rather, the way, when the neshama comes into the guf, the name connects the neshama, it's the bridge, it's the sewing that sews the neshama into the guf and bringing the chayis of the neshama into the guf. Now, in regards to the way the name brings the neshama into the guf, the chayis in the guf, there's two ways. In general, they gives the neshama to a guf, the general idea, the adam, the human being, and then there's specifically each person in their own individual element. Because there's a generic idea that we're human, and that's a mission of the name to bring it, but then specifically to connect it, and then specifically each and every one of us are individuality. Now, Torah explains that the Avos, each one of us, each one of us has the Avos, but you only have the three, you don't have the Shevotim. The Shevotim, you could have a few, you could have one, etc. So the Avos and the Shevotim, it's not only he says that the Avos, each one of us has the Shevotim, we don't necessarily have, but more than that. The Avos, because they're the source of Am Yisrael, each one of us from our essence, because we're part of Am Yisrael, we have that equality. We have that same element, just like we're a human being. We have that common denominator of the Avos. But the Shevotim is a specific element which divides us. In other words, makes us separate. It's not the common denominator. Just like the difference we said, the 2 points that connect the neshama to the guf. Number one, the general, and number two, the specific. So the Avos are the general and the Shevotim are the specific. So what's the difference between the names of the Avos and the names of the Shevotim? The names of the Avos is a general Hamshacha. The names of the Shevotim is a specific Hamshacha, the way it comes out individuality. And that's why it was given by the mothers, by the Shenas Shevotim. We know the difference between a father and mother regarding giving birth, that the etzem etzius, the existence of the ben, comes from the father. But the way it expresses itself and the way it opens up and fully develops into full, infant is through the mother's womb for 9 months. And the Rebbe says, interesting, you also find that difference after birth, that there's a deeper essence connection between a son and a father, even though begilui, a son gets along much easier with the mother. It's easier. By father, it's more moida. It's not necessarily the same ava. But Rebbe says, but etzem, it's there. And let me totally go out of my ballpark over here. But the psychology today shows that most men's issues have to do with their relationships with their father. Even though you think big deal, they have a good relationship with their mother, because again, it's essence. A kesher with an av is something fundamental, specifically for a man. Back to the sikha. Forgive what I just said. And therefore it says, that's why they're called, the avanim are called chachma ubina, father and mother. Chachma is the kudah, and bina is the way it expresses. So the Shevotim are the expression, and that's the way it comes up in Gili through the mother, the feminine energy. and they call the name. They bring out the individuality, but the essence comes from the others. And that name is it's not specific. It comes direct just because Azoi. That's the connection between the person and the neshama. But we have to understand the names that are brought in the parsha don't necessarily show us a connection to the avodah. They talk about more the mothers. The Reuven has nothing to do with Reuven. It's the Hashem ba'ani. And therefore comes Rashi by the Reuven and says, no, we're going to focus on the Uba b'ni lebein chami. I'm not focusing on my feelings now. I'm focusing on him. There's a connection between his avodah. And I'll say in other names as well. Alpia now, and in the unedited version, the Rebbe goes more into that nekudah. According to this, we could explain the derech efsher, possibly, the connection between Parshas Vayeitzei to Tes Kislev, which was that year, the birthday and the yahrzeit of the Mittel Rebbe. Why? What's the difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Mittel Rebbe? Alter Rebbe is Chacham. Mittel Rebbe is Bina, the way it comes out and expresses Chassidus b'chayvus hanar, expansiveness. And that's like Kriyas Hashemos, which is this week's Parsha, all the names of the Shevotim. And because of the expansiveness of Bina, and the Rebbe over here quotes from Beis Rebbe and Sefer Sichos, as wenn zwei Yidden treffen sich, sollen sie reden in Chassidus, two people should meet and talk about Chassidus. Or as it says in Sefer Sichos, junge Leute verstehen in Kesser wie die 5 Finger, that is actually, if we understood in Kesser the way we know about our 5 fingers, the Mittel Rebbe would be happy. So that brings the unbelievable expansiveness that when Yidden talk about Chassidus all over the place, and that brings Kosim Malka Mashiach Mitzvah Hashem should be taken from Miyad Mamish. Just a beautiful, beautiful Fabrenga.